Andor episode 8 just dropped and it needs to be broken down, so let's get straight into it. We begin the episode with Andor being shuffled along to his new prison. As the shoretroopers are sorting out the prisoners, the guy in front of Cassian identifies himself as Tuck Hybecks, who is from the planet Galdi. The trooper then assigns him to the transport headed for Belsavis, which is actually an Old Republic reference. Belsavis was a planet first used by the Rakatan Empire as a prison colony. Many of the dangerous prisoners of the Empire were imprisoned there, and the planet prison would continue to operate under Republic rule. Later on, during the Imperial era, a number of younglings sought refuge there as well, but this was soon discovered by Palpatine and the group was forced to flee the planet. But all this is legends, so it looks like in canon the Empire has continued to use Belsavis as a prison planet, and whatever fate awaits Tuck Hybecks definitely won't be pleasant. Cassian is then asked by the trooper which planet he is from, and he says Dedris Plata, which is a completely new planet, and he is directed towards the transport headed for Narkina 5, again an entirely new location. The prisoner, after Cassian, informs the trooper that he's from Girmos, and he is then directed towards Belsavis. But if you pay close attention, the guy actually walks up behind Cassian, lining up for the transport headed for Narkina 5. Where the guy should have gone was the ship over there, which is headed for Belsavis, so not sure if this was intentional or just a simple mistake. Cyril, while at his job, gets picked up by the ISB, and we learn that Cyril is actively hunting down Cassian, abusing the tools of his job to do so. Cassian finally arrives at Narkina 5, and Dedra briefs Yularen on the situation. It overall gives us an indication that the Empire is slowly pivoting its attention towards rebel activities, and specifically Luthen, who has been codenamed Axis, the centerpiece in which all rebel activity rotates around. Cassian is forced into an Imperial labor factory, and we see some Imperials wearing special boots, and we later see why, as the metal floor has the capability to shock everyone who doesn't. During Cyril's interrogation, he tries to get hired by the ISB, but Dedra warns him to stay away, which obviously isn't going to happen given how driven he is, and it probably won't be the last time we see their paths cross. As Cassian is led away, he takes notes of the special boots the Imperials wear, and he's then introduced to Kino Loy, the floor manager. Kino here is played by Andy Serkis, the same actor behind Snoke and Precious. We are then told of the scale of the factory operation. Across 7 different levels, there is an estimate of about 2,500 prisoners, but there are of course probably more prisoners on the planet, as we do see many other facilities in the wide shot. Kino then tells Cassian,
"You play against all the other tables in this room. I play against all the other rooms."
Showing how the Empire preoccupies the prisoners with competing against each other to distract them from causing any trouble. It very much leans in hard to the concept of social Darwinism, in which only the strongest will survive, all while working to the advantage of the Empire. Cassian is introduced to his team, and the whole scene gives me a lot of Squid Game vibes. As Cassian gets to know his team, we are introduced to the character Melshi. This is Ruscott Melshi, and we actually first saw him in Rogue One. Melshi was a veteran rebel and would also be the one to rescue Jyn from Imperial prison. He would later also help lead the rebel mission on Scarif, where he would later die alongside Cassian. So I guess this here is the origin story for the friendship between Cassian and Melshi, and I'm sure that in the prison break scene to come, the two will have to work with each other to make an escape. Mon Mothma meets with Tay Kolma, and the tension between Perrin and Tay is clearly building.
Well, good luck feeding the galaxy. I'm off to feed myself.
Charity begins at home.
The fuck you say to me, you little shit?
We learn that the beverage they're drinking, or rather the worm-like creature, is called squigs, which are a species of fish native to Naboo. Mon Mothma greets Senator Dao, first mentioned back in episode 6 of Andor. As Cassian waits to return to his cell, he notices that Taga is using sign language to communicate with the other prisoner from another section. It's not entirely clear as to what they're talking about, but it just might be an escape plan that they are trying to hatch. Mon Mothma debates with the other senators about the PORD, and here we get to see a Senator Tinar and a Senator Vivin. It's not entirely clear as to what role they will play in the upcoming episodes, but they are given full names in the credits, so I'm sure we'll get to see them in the future. Cassian is introduced to his cell, and on this screen there is a number 2189. Not quite the same as Princess Leia's cell number of 2187, but it's close enough. The number corresponds to the amount of days left in a person's sentence. We then learn that all the other prisoners are curious about the PORD, as many of the prisoners have had their sentence increased. One of the inmates mentioned that Aldhani incident, telling Cassian that the rebels slaughtered an entire garrison, which isn't true, but it's more than likely used to fuel Imperial propaganda about the rebels, or the story itself has been greatly inflated upon it being retold over and over again. As the inmates head back into their own cells, you can see in the background that the old man Olaf only has 74 days left. And judging by how frail and old he is, I won't be surprised if some tragedy befalls him before he actually finishes his sentence. We learn more about Perrin and Mothma's relationship, both of whom were married to each other at 15. This was likely an arranged marriage per Chandrilan custom, and would explain why the two don't have the best of relationships. We then get a very subtle time skip as the number of days left on Cassian's sentence is reduced from 2189 to 2159, indicating that a month has passed since he arrived at the factory. And it's quite clear that since Cassian has arrived, Table 5 has been doing quite well, possibly becoming one of the best tables in the room. Back on Ferrix, we see Bix taking care of Marva, who tried to infiltrate the hotel the Imperials are currently occupying. We learn about the old Rick's floodgate, which is probably how they were going to get Bix out of Imperial custody later, and we do know that the hotel does get blown up at some point, so this could be how the rebels do it. We also learn about the Daughters of Ferrix, an organization which seems to take care of past presidents of Ferrix, which Marva was once. Nearby, Vel and Cinta spy on Bix and Brasso, and we get to learn more about their relationship. Desperate, Bix tries to get in contact with Luthen, and we cut to Luthen's shop. In the background, we can see a Temple Guard mask which did appear in the last episode, but it's a lot clearer here. Clea and Luthen debate on whether to cut ties with Ferrix, and it's quite clear that Luthen struggles with this idea. Luthen then travels to Sigra Milo to meet a rather familiar face. One of the inmates in Cassian's prison kills himself by jumping onto the red lights, which basically fries him to death. We then learn that the ISB has managed to catch Pac, and this is probably due to them intercepting the signal sent by Bix when she was trying to get in touch with Luthen. And since Pac was captured, the Imperials now have Bix's description, who was later found and caught as well. Luthen arrives at Segra Milo, and we see Benthic keeping watch and an X-Wing in the background. Benthic is of course Saw's trusty right-hand man and has been seen many times in other Star Wars stories. We then get to see Luthen talk to Saw Gerrera, and the two play a sort of guessing game as to who is responsible for Aldhani. Obviously we know that Luthen was responsible, but judging by the fact that he didn't want to make it known to Saw that he was responsible, could be him just being cautious to ensure that it wouldn't trace back to him should Saw be compromised. Luthen tries to sell parts and in exchange asks that Saw Gerrera meets with Anto Krieger, a new rebel character. However, Gerrera very apparently doesn't like Anto because he is a separatist, and this is because in the animated Clone Wars show, Saw's own sister was killed by the separatists while resisting separatist rule, so you can sort of understand why he would be reluctant to work with them. But essentially what Luthen is trying to do is to bring together different rebel factions into what would be later known as the Rebel Alliance, and the whole scene just reveals how difficult that can be. Saw then goes on to list a whole bunch of other rebel factions, including a Neo-Republican one, which basically means that they are fighting for a new republic. Then there is the Gorman Front, again another reference to the Gormans in this show. The Gorman Front was essentially a group of rebels on the planet Gorman who, in response to the Empire's atrocities against them, rose up in violent rebellion. Saw then mentions the Partisan Alliance, which is interesting because Saw himself leads a group of partisans, so perhaps he will eventually join up with the broader alliance of partisans across the galaxy. He then mentions the sectorists, and while we don't have exact information on what this term means, it likely refers to a political movement that advocates for the dissolution of the Empire and a return to a splintered galaxy, in which local sectors would rule themselves, essentially back to a pre-Republic era. Then there are the human cultists, which is pretty out there in terms of rebels and galaxy partitionists who probably advocate for the division of the galaxy according to some social political paradigm. Saw then asks Luthen what his political alignment is, and Luthen gives a rather vague answer to this question, which does bring into question his true motives for why he fights against the Empire. Saw then fully rejects Luthen's offer to meet Anto. Back on Ferrix, Bix is brought before Dedra, and we get to see a tortured Pac slumped on a chair. Deidre tries to play some mind games with Biggs by showing her pack and while pretending for it not to be intentional. The whole scene very much mirrors Princess Leia's torture scene with the closing of the doors. So that was episode 8 of Andor. I've got to say I'm really liking where the story is going so far, and I really like the whole conversation between Luthen and Saw, and it really adds a lot of depth and complexity to the rebellion. So let me know what you think in the comments down below, be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. I am the Lost Acolyte,
and I have spoken.